A 10-year-old girl brought her sick little brother to the front of a clinic and accidentally met a millionaire. What he did next shocked everyone. Bang! A dry, jarring sound echoed through the second-floor hallway. No one responded, no voices, only the silent resonance of a cracked wall, a headless doll rolling slowly across the tiled floor, stomach acid burning through the corner of a torn invoice. A crooked plastic sign outside the door read, "2B, do not disturb." Behind that door, a little girl was tearing strips of fabric from the hem of an old coat. Her hands were cracked and chapped, yet her eyes remained unusually calm. Her name was Hannah Whitaker, 10 years old, orphaned with no adults in the room, no electricity either. Hannah worked under the light of a bedside flashlight, the only thing left after her mother passed away nearly 3 weeks ago. In the corner of the room, Jonah, Hannah's 2-year-old brother, lay in a cardboard box lined with sweaters. He breathed with a wheeze, still clutching a one-eared teddy bear, the only item both siblings had managed to keep from their past. Hannah pulled a blanket tight and tied it into a sling across her back. Her movements were decisive, as if she had done this hundreds of times, though, in truth, she had never left the building alone at night. Voices echoed from the hallway. "2B, that kid's still here." A woman's voice, curt, indifferent. Hannah stayed silent. She recognized the voice. Ms. Tracy Shaw, the landlord, a woman who lived alone, always locked her door at 6 p.m. and never let go of her pepper spray. She didn't like children, didn't like silence, and especially didn't like people who didn't pay on time. 3 weeks ago, when their mother lost, Hannah didn't tell anyone. She quietly drew the curtains, tried to keep Jonah quiet, and answered the phone in her mother's voice when the landlord called. But rent couldn't be faked. The last envelope slipped under the door was a cold warning. No documents, no guardian, no money, means no right to stay. A gentle knock on the door, just once. Then the sound of fading footsteps and cheap heels slapping against the floor. Hannah didn't react. She only turned to Jonah, leaned down, and pressed her forehead to his. The boy whimpered. Hannah silently unzipped her backpack. Inside were an opened can of soup, some crumbs of bread, a children's book with its spine coming apart, and a half-empty bottle of water. She looked around the room once more. The family photo had faded. Her father wasn't in it. He had left long ago. Just their mother, and the two of them. Now, their mother was gone too. Hannah lifted Jonah onto her back. Every movement made her flinch, not from pain, but from the weight. Not the weight of the body, but of the question pressing on her soul. Could she still trust anyone at all? Outside, the wind tugged violently at a tilted sign that read, "For rent, clean rooms, cheap rates." Hannah stepped slowly down the porch stairs. A young man passed by with a coffee cup in hand. He didn't look at her. Jonah coughed. Hannah sat down, gently patted his back, then stood quickly when she saw headlights in the distance. A car was approaching. She raised her hand. The car didn't stop. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, shook his head. She didn't cry, didn't hope, just kept walking. On another street corner, near a flickering traffic light, a man in a black coat stepped out of a liquor store. He opened his phone and read a message. "Tomorrow is Emily's memorial. Will you be there?" His name was William Grayson, 55, widower. He had lost his daughter to an untreated illness in a remote rural town. He didn't reply, just looked up at the sky, then walked toward his SUV. Meanwhile, Hannah passed a deserted bus stop. The bench was cold. She set Jonah down and leaned against the backrest. The dim glow from a pizza shop cast a pale red hue on her face. No one asked where she was going. No one asked why a child was carrying her baby brother on a winter night. "We're almost at a place with doctors," Hannah whispered to Jonah, adjusting the scarf around his neck. "Just one person, Jonah. One person willing to stop." She stood up and walked on. The streetlights flickered a pale green, glistening on the wet sidewalk. The dry trees trembled as if trying to retreat from the biting cold. The second-floor window of Waverley Clinic reflected the blinking red of an electronic sign. "Urgent care. Open late." From a distance, Hannah saw the light, and she walked faster. The wind hurt her face, but she didn't slow. Her back was burdened by Jonah, barely breathing, but her heart clung to a single thought. Where there's light, there's hope. When she reached the glass door, she stopped. Inside was a different world. Spotless floors, leather chairs, a humming space heater. A woman in a white coat was chatting with a blonde receptionist. They both smiled, but their expressions froze when their eyes met Hannah's shadow. Hannah tapped lightly on the glass. A soft sound. No one came to open the door. She knocked harder. Her hands began to shake, from the cold and from fear, though fear had become something blurry now, just a reflex when despair became suffocating. The receptionist, Linda Paxton, approached the door. Through the glass, Hannah saw her lips moving. Then Linda opened the door a crack and bent down. "What's wrong with the baby?" Linda asked, her voice concerned. "Can you show me any papers for your brother so the doctor can help?" "Do you have insurance?" Linda asked, her eyes hesitant. Hannah shook her head, voice hoarse. "I don't have anything. Just him. He can't breathe." Linda hesitated. She looked at Jonah, then asked softly, as if trying to understand, "Where are your parents?" "My mom died. No one knows. I didn't know who to tell. And..." Her voice broke, then faded to a whisper. "No one asked. No one came." Linda turned her head, about to speak, when a sharp voice rang from the hallway. "Linda, shut the door, now." It was Dr. Evelyn Morris, the woman in the white coat standing in the hallway, eyes like ice. Linda paused for a second, then followed the order. The door closed. Hannah sank to her knees. "Please," she said. "My brother. He's not breathing." Inside, Linda Paxton remained still. Her hand was placed on the edge of the reception desk, knuckles pale from gripping too tightly. Outside the glass door, that little girl, Hannah, was still kneeling, her body leaning so far to one side, she looked about to collapse. Her matted, tangled hair covered part of her face, but Linda could clearly see the bluish lips and the blankness beginning to take over her eyes. Jonah, slumped on her back, didn't move. His head lolled to one side, an arm hanging limply. No one should have to witness a barely breathing like that. No one should stay silent upon seeing such a thing. Linda turned. "Mrs. Morris," her voice cracked, "we have to do something." Evelyn Morris, the head physician of the clinic, had just signed off on the diagnosis form from the previous case. She didn't look up. Her voice was flat, as though she'd said these exact words 1,000 times. "No papers, no insurance, no admission. You know the policy. But the child out there, no medical record, no legal guardian, no right to receive treatment." Linda swallowed dryly. She turned back and looked out the window. Hannah was now using her bare hands to hold Jonah from behind, as if trying to keep him from collapsing completely. Those two little bodies, small, fragile, were bathed in a harsh, unforgiving white light. Linda spoke, like someone clinging to something that no longer had a place to stand. "Children can be in danger too, Evelyn." Evelyn set the file folder down. Her voice was low but steady. "And if we save the wrong person, if there are complications, if they sue, we lose our license. Are you ready for that?" Linda didn't respond immediately. Evelyn stepped closer, slowly, and continued. "Do you think running a clinic only takes kindness?" "A nurse tried that last year. She got suspended. No one defended her. The system doesn't leave room for mistakes made from emotion." On the other side of the glass, Hannah was gasping, her eyes half shut. Jonah's body was limp, head drooped to one side, and his one-eared teddy bear had fallen into the snow. And at that exact moment, a black SUV glided to a slow stop, just a few steps from the curb. William Grayson, 55, once one of the biggest investors in downtown Waverly. A widower, formerly lived in a Connecticut mansion, but also a man who had spent an entire sleepless night outside an emergency room, watching his daughter die of pneumonia simply because there wasn't a doctor within a 40-mile radius. He shut off the engine. His eyes locked immediately onto the scene outside the window. A 10-year-old girl clutching her near-unconscious brother, kneeling in front of a clinic as if begging for something far too small to be denied. And he saw her little brother, that unmoving child wrapped in bits of torn cloth, held by a love far too vast for someone her age to carry. William didn't get out right away. At first, he just meant to stop for a few minutes, to observe, then drive on. But then the girl lifted her head, her lips dry and cracked, her eyes locked on the face of the strange man, as if seeing in him the last flicker of humanity left. She didn't plead. She didn't cry. She simply said, "If you have a daughter, please don't let my brother hurt like this." The words weren't loud, but the wind carried them, and the wind carried them straight to William's heart. His chest tightened. The last thing he'd seen before Emily passed was also a look, just as fragile, just as unblaming, just as quietly calling out to a father standing helpless. William inhaled deeply, walked toward the glass door. Linda saw him. She froze. "Mr. Grayson." He didn't answer her, just looked straight inside, then knocked on the glass. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. His voice was low but clear. "I'll take responsibility. Save the child." Evelyn appeared behind the glass. "William, you can't just—" "Not just," he interrupted. "It's the right thing." Linda didn't hesitate anymore. She pressed the button. The door opened. The wind rushed in, carrying the scent of snow, Jonah's broken breaths, and something everyone there understood. This was the time to be human, not just an employee or a doctor. William bent down, picked up the teddy bear, and handed it to Hannah. "You've kept him safe," he said. Hannah hugged the bear tightly to her chest, eyes fixed on Jonah, as Linda carried him inside. The girl scrambled to follow. William walked behind them, his gaze never leaving those small, fragile shoulders. He no longer saw Hannah. He saw Emily and himself 10 years ago, standing outside a door that never opened. Outside the second-floor window of the Waverly Clinic, a gust of wind whipped against the electronic sign, making the lights of the words "Urgent Care, Open Late" flicker a few times before stabilizing again. The sky was still dark, and the cold, metallic scent of the night lingered in the parking lot. William Grayson stood still, as if time for him was moving in slow motion. His eyes didn't leave the little girl clutching the teddy bear. That gaze didn't just see Hannah. It saw a past that never forgave. In his mind, another door swung open, not the glass door of the clinic, but the door of memory. That year, Emily was 7. He was in a shareholder meeting in Chicago when he got the call. His wife said their daughter had a high fever and couldn't breathe. An hour later, they brought Emily to the nearest clinic, but the hospital refused to admit her because the referral paperwork from the family doctor hadn't been completed. His wife cried, argued. They waited another 40 minutes, then turned back to take their child to the city. Emily didn't make it on the freeway. William wasn't there. He only arrived in time to see the thin cloth covering his daughter's face in the ambulance. Her tiny hand still clutched a toy, a pale blue teddy bear. Back in the present, William stepped into the lobby. He saw Evelyn Morris approaching, her face unchanged. But Linda, the receptionist who had opened the door earlier, was standing there, trembling. Her tears were on the verge of falling. Evelyn slowly shook her head. "William, this is a private facility. If this case has complications, you can't leave a child unconscious and in pain on the doorstep. Go on." William walked straight to the reception desk. Bang! His hand slammed down on the counter. The echo thundered through the lobby. Evelyn froze. "What are we doing here?" William said, "weighing a human life against a policy." No further explanation was needed. William removed his coat, bent down, and draped it over Jonah, whose body had already turned bluish. Without hesitation, he lifted the boy in his arms, as if carrying his own daughter all those years ago. Evelyn stepped forward, blocking the hallway. "You can't just take a patient inside. Emergency protocol requires initial paperwork." "What do you want me to sign? A waiver? A legal release? I'll sign everything. But if we wait one more minute, this boy won't need a doctor anymore." Evelyn pressed her lips together. A flicker of hesitation flashed in her eyes, then disappeared. "If this gets out, the clinic could lose its license. We are not authorized to treat a child without legal identification." William looked her straight in the eyes. "And if tomorrow this boy is gone because we hesitated, do you have the authority to explain that to your own conscience, Evelyn?" No one said another word. Linda rushed forward, pushed open the hallway door. "Follow me." Inside the hallway, the surgical lights lit up one by one, cold and merciless. Hannah came last. Her eyes never left the footsteps of the man who had just staked his honor and his memories to save her brother. The emergency room door closed behind them. Outside, the air was still cold. But perhaps, inside, a different life had just been held onto, not by regulation, but by action. On the floor, the earless teddy bear lay for a second. Then Hannah's arm darted back and picked it up. She held it tight, as if it were a part of her brother, then hurried after William and Linda down the hallway. At the end of the hall, the light from the emergency room blurred in Hannah's vision. But the voice of a nurse shouting, "Get the oxygen tank ready!" told her the worst might not yet be over. And for the first time, she whispered without sound, Don't take him, like you took Mom." Behind her, William paused for a heartbeat. Though he didn't turn around, he heard it, or felt it. And that was the moment he held Jonah tighter, as if clutching something neither he nor Hannah could bear to let slip away. And if in front of you is a glass door left slightly ajar, would you knock? Comment yes if you found your courage, no if you're still unsure. On the top floor of a small suburban hospital, dim yellow lights were left on in the hallway to save electricity, casting shadows across the glass panels that shimmered like rippling water. Inside the emergency room, the familiar sound of a heart monitor echoed, flickering, fragile. Jonah was lying on his side, an oxygen tube attached to his nose. His skin was pale, his forehead drenched in sweat, and his tiny hands curled tightly, as if trying to hold onto the last bit of warmth. Dana Lowell, a young resident nurse who had transferred from the city just a few months ago, was assigned to monitor this special emergency case tonight. She had once worked in the pediatric department of a major hospital, but left after filing for extended leave due to personal reasons. Dana never spoke about it. All anyone knew was that since arriving here, she was always willing to take the night shifts, always chose the hardest cases, and always spent more time with poor, sick children. "He looks like my son. When he was little, he wheezed just like this, but thankfully we had insurance." No one responded. Jonah remained unconscious, his breaths short and fast. At the corner of the hospital corridor, Hannah curled up on a plastic chair. She had dozed off, her head drooped onto the seat's arm, still clutching a one-eared teddy bear. The neon light flickered across her soot-smudged cheeks and the marks of a long journey. Grace Holloway, an older nurse with thinning silver hair, quietly placed a paper cup of milk and a sandwich on the metal table next to Hannah. She said nothing, just glanced at the girl, sighed softly, then turned away. The door opened. Sheriff Dale Murphy stepped in. His cowboy hat hung loosely in one hand. His boots made a soft sound on the vinyl floor. In his other hand was a file folder, an intake report from Child Protective Services, and unprocessed paperwork from a social worker. He stopped in front of the hospital room, looking through the frosted glass. The call that brought Murphy here came from a receptionist at the Waverly Clinic a few hours earlier. Janet Moore, after witnessing a chaotic scene at the reception desk when William Grayson intervened, had quietly filed an internal report as required. And the system, like an emotionless machine, passed the information to Child Protective Services, then to the sheriff's office. Murphy paused, not entering. Through the glass, he saw the child on oxygen and the little girl huddled in her seat, eyes fixed on the hospital bed. Suddenly, Hannah looked up. She stared directly at him, her eyes dark and rimmed with exhaustion, silent. Not afraid, not resentful, just something else. Like a question buried beneath a wariness too familiar to unsee. Are you a good man, or just someone in a uniform? The question floated in the air, not really expecting an answer, but it made Murphy's steps falter. It had been a long time since a question made him feel so unsure and so small. William Grayson was leaning against the hallway wall, watching every flicker of expression between Hannah and Murphy. Inside him stirred a strange feeling. Not anger, not pity, but a quiet empathy for another man caught between two roles, a representative of the law, and a man still capable of feeling. Murphy gave a slight nod and set the file down on the table near the door. Just then, Dana stepped out, gently closing the door behind her. "You are..." "Murphy, sheriff." He cleared his throat. "There was a report about a wandering orphan. I was sent to verify the temporary custody situation." Dana didn't respond right away. She glanced at the file, then looked at Jonah through the glass. She spoke slowly, with restraint. "If you need paperwork, wait. The boy is being stabilized. The girl is not tonight's problem." Murphy said nothing more. He looked at Hannah one last time, then turned and walked slowly out of the emergency area. William Grayson remained leaning against the hallway wall. He watched Murphy's figure recede, then turned back toward the room where Jonah lay. The breeze from the air conditioner brushed gently through his hair. He said nothing, just gave a quiet nod as Dana went back in to continue monitoring the ventilator. A moment later, William stepped inside. He walked toward Hannah, knelt down, and gently touched her shoulder. "You should eat something." Hannah opened her eyes, dazed. When she saw him, her gaze softened, but still didn't leave Jonah. "I'm not hungry." "Then eat for your brother, so if he wakes up, you'll have the strength to hold him." Hannah hesitated for a moment. Then, very softly, she took the cup of milk and the sandwich, but didn't eat, just held them tightly, as if afraid that if she let go, everything would vanish. William sat down beside her. No promises, no comfort, just two people, one old and one young, sitting quietly together in the night, a place where no law could arrive in time, and no court could understand why. Sometimes, people have to break the rules to save a single breath. Inside the room, Jonah stirred slightly. The monitor let out a beep, Longer than before, Dana rushed in. Her eyes began to brighten. Oxygen's up, heart rate steady. The boy is stabilizing. No one said anything, but from where she sat, Hannah slowly looked up at William. For the first time, her lips curled slightly. Just a faint smile. But in the dim light of the hospital, it shone like the sun breaking over snow-covered edges. Outside the emergency ward, the snow had stopped falling, but traces of muddy footprints still marked where people had passed through the night before. On a desk in the faculty meeting room of Riverbend Elementary School, a stack of student files lay open, papers in disarray, hastily scribbled handwriting crowding the pages. Angela Reed, the third-grade teacher who had taught Hannah last year, sat quietly flipping through the pages of an old notebook. For nearly 2 weeks, she had sent emails to parents, called every contact number the school had on file, but no one had answered. When she saw Hannah's name crossed out in red on the attendance sheet, Angela began to worry. She filled out the form to report a prolonged student absence, but no one responded. Then this morning, after hearing a vague report in the local news about an unidentified girl being rushed to the hospital in critical condition, Angela felt something was wrong. She skipped her homeroom session and returned to the staff office, rummaging through her old notes. Her eyes paused at a line written in blue ink. Hannah fell asleep during math. Backpack smelled of old food. Skipped lunch. Angela sighed, gripping the notebook tightly. She remembered that day, how Hannah had bowed her head silently, slipping a half-eaten sandwich into her coat pocket, avoiding her classmates' gazes. At the end of the table, Principal Leonard Walsh was rearranging the meeting schedule. When he saw Angela approaching with the notebook in hand, he didn't look up. "I thought this matter was settled last month, Angela. Let's not reopen things unnecessarily." Angela hesitated. Hannah stopped coming to school 2 weeks before her mother gone. No one checked in. No one went to the house. That's our responsibility. "The school is not a social investigation service," Walsh replied, closing a file folder, eyes avoiding hers. "She's not the first student to come from a difficult background." Angela looked at him for a moment. Then she turned away and took the notebook back to her office. In a softly lit hospital room, warmed by a gentle yellow light, Hannah sat hunched on a small stool, arms wrapped around a pale blue notebook. Jonah was still asleep. His breathing was steady. The oxygen tube remained, but the color had returned to his lips. Hannah held a short, broken pencil, sharpened with a razor blade. She wrote slowly, "If Mum were still alive, I think she'd be scared too. But she would say, 'You did the right thing.' And she would hold Jonah. She would lull him to sleep, just like last night. But this time, I held him for her." She paused, inhaling deeply. The mix of disinfectant and hospital paper no longer made her feel cold. At a small cafe a few blocks from the hospital, not long ago, Vincent Hale, a young man in his 20s, wearing large headphones and always carrying a smartphone tripod, sat by the window, sipping a lukewarm latte while checking his TikTok engagement stats. He was the one who had recorded the clip of Hannah knocking on the clinic door in the snowstorm. The video had garnered tens of thousands of views within hours, but without any act of help or captions calling for assistance. Vincent's framing cut off the moment the girl knelt down and Mr. Grayson stepped forward. But what drew the most attention was the cold clinic light and the shocking caption, "Drama outside the clinic. Undocumented child. Abandoned." Vincent didn't care about the truth. He only cared about the shares and comments. At the same time, a young woman with curly hair, around 25, opened her laptop at a nearby table, eyes locked on a video feed from a security camera. Ava Dunn, a young journalist in the social affairs division of the local paper, was reviewing the footage from the previous night. The girl kneeling in the snow, knocking, and the elderly man standing to block the wind for her. She dialed a number. "Hello. This is Ava Dunn from Waverley Voice. I'd like to speak briefly with Mr. William Grayson about what happened last night. We believe this is a story worth telling." There was hesitation on the other end. Then a man's voice answered, low, steady, and not easily swayed. "Not for PR, just to keep a promise to Emily." Ava started to say something, but the line had already gone dead. She sat still, fingers resting on the keyboard. The name Emily had never come up in public records, but the way he said it, as if every word carried a piece of someone he had lost, left Ava unable to type any further. She saved the video, closed the laptop, and wrote only one sentence in her notebook. "Sometimes, silence is the truest thing a person can say." After Ava's call, William quietly approached the bench where Hannah was curled up, arms around her knees, eyes unfocused. She trembled slightly, not from cold, but from a tension so deeply ingrained it had become instinct. William knelt, gently touched her left wrist, and saw something unexpected. After the call from Ava, William walked over to the long bench where Hannah sat, hunched, arms hugging her knees, her gaze empty. She was shaking slightly, not quite from the chill, but from an anxiety that had become second nature. William leaned down and gently touched Hannah's left wrist, where a fading bruise was still visible. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice deep, but with a flicker of alarm in his eyes. Hannah hesitated. Then she pulled up her sleeve, revealing more mistreated on her upper arm and down her side. Some were old, almost gone. Others still bore faint fingernail marks. "Not recent. It was a while ago," she murmured, as if trying to convince herself that saying it wouldn't make things worse. "Her name was Brenda. She used to be my babysitter, but Mom worked night shifts, often didn't make it home in time. Brenda would yell a lot, pull my arms hard. Then, one day, she just didn't come back." William said nothing. His eyes didn't leave hers, but they seemed to look through her, as if he were seeing someone else. Some other Emily left behind in a life he once believed he had control over. Hannah continued, her voice steady but cracking beneath the surface. "After that, I took care of Jonah myself. Mum tried her best, but we were too poor. When she died, no one came. I didn't know who to call, so I just stayed. I washed Jonah, cleaned him, shared every piece of food we had. One night, Jonah asked me, 'Where did Mom go, sissy?' William turned his face away. His shoulders trembled slightly. He gripped his cane so tightly that his knuckles turned white. That sentence hit him again, leaving him breathless, just like the day he stood outside Emily's ambulance, just like the eyes of the child now sitting in front of him. And this time, he didn't look away. The next morning, Ava Dunn saved the video clip as evidence. She didn't post it right away, but brought it to the hospital where Hannah was staying, still uncertain in her heart. But then the clip began to spread, not by her, but from the original recorder. The online community shared it, discussed it, debated it. Conflicting opinions appeared everywhere. But this time, no one could say, "I didn't know." At first, there were choked-up comments. "I couldn't hold back my tears watching this. Did we really let this happen in the heart of America?" But soon, opinions began to split. "This is staged. That little girl is clearly acting. Why are homeless kids allowed to wander like that? Where are their parents? Who is that man? Are we sure he's not exploiting them to boost his own image?" Meanwhile, in a local television studio, Lisa Morrow, a well-known commentator with a sharp, critical tone, was live on the morning show. Who is William Grayson? A millionaire with no medical background, assuming the right to interfere in emergency procedures. She adjusted her glasses, her voice sharper. We're moved by the image of a grieving father, but emotions don't have the right to replace the law. If everyone acted like Mr. Grayson, what would happen to our entire healthcare system? She paused, then ended with a line like a blade. It's exactly this kind of sentimentality that makes people forget. Protocols don't exist to obstruct. They exist to protect. William Grayson was sitting in the hospital room, where Jonah was still breathing through a support tube. Hannah had fallen asleep next to her brother, still holding her notebook. William quietly looked out the window, where the morning light was streaming in. But he didn't turn on the TV, didn't touch his phone. He didn't want to know what the outside world was saying, or maybe he had long grown used to being judged. A soft knock sounded on the door. Ava Dunn stepped in, holding a printed file. She looked hesitant. I'm sorry for coming without an invitation, but I thought you should know. This has gone beyond the local level. William tilted his head slightly. He took the file, but didn't open it. His gaze shifted from Ava to Hannah and lingered there. He saw the girl dreaming, her hand still resting on her brother's shoulder, as if afraid to lose the only warmth left. I told you, I didn't want the press near this, he said slowly. I don't need more headlines. Ava nodded. I know, and I haven't posted anything sensational, but people are talking about you, about these two kids. Some good, some bad. Some are calling you a hero. Some think you overstepped. William stared off into the distance. A flicker of hesitation passed through his eyes, then quietly faded. I'm not used to being seen as a symbol. When I was younger, I only knew how to make money. And then, Emily. He didn't continue, but Ava understood. She stepped closer, her voice soft as wind. Then this time, let people see what really happened, not to protect you, but to protect kids like Hannah. William sighed. Then he smiled, but his gaze still wavered. The shadow of the past, the day he stood helpless as Emily walked away forever, still hadn't let him go. Just as Ava stepped out of the room, his phone buzzed. William glanced at the screen. A strange number. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Grayson, this is Rachel Bloom, human rights attorney. I saw the video, along with several others. There are pieces of evidence in them that I believe would be explosive in court. I'm not calling to convince you. I just want you to know, if you still plan to help those two children, you can't fight alone. William was silent. He didn't answer immediately. He glanced at Hannah, still sleeping, hand never leaving Jonah. Then he spoke, his voice hoarse. Give me one night. I'll call you back, after I ask Hannah. He hung up. And just then, the door opened again. Angela Reed stepped in. The hospital door creaked open. A hesitant voice spoke. Excuse me. I wasn't sure if I was allowed in. I'm Hannah's teacher. Angela Reed William and Hannah both turned. Hannah squinted, taking a moment to recognize the woman standing uncertainly at the doorway. Curly hair slightly messy, a faded fabric coat. But those eyes, the ones that always watched her after class, she remembered clearly. Ms. Reed. Hannah's voice was as faint as wind slipping through a crack and just as fragile. Angela walked in slowly, placing a canvas bag on a nearby table. I saw the clip this morning and recognized you. I'm sorry for not doing more earlier. I reported to the principal weeks ago when I saw you bringing leftover pastries, falling asleep at your desk. But William stayed silent. He watched them, as if trying to piece together the fragments of a story he no longer wanted to be on the outside of. Angela bent down, held Hannah's hand, trembling. I'm sorry for not having a louder voice. But if you need someone now, I'll stand by you." William gripped his cane tighter. He looked into Hannah's eyes, no longer evasive, no longer doubtful, only holding a deep fatigue far beyond her age. And he knew it was time not just to save a child, but to stand with a person, so she no longer had to knock on doors alone. "I once reported to the principal that she often brought leftover food, even fell asleep from hunger once. But they told me not to interfere too deeply. I didn't know it had gotten this bad." William listened. It felt as if once again the silent fragments surrounding Hannah were beginning to reveal themselves, from the school system to society's neglect. Angela looked at him. "I don't know who you are, but if you stayed when others walked away, thank you." William bowed his head, voice raspy. "Not everyone gets a chance to try again. I was just lucky to get one. I know, and I came to the right person." Hannah still didn't know what was happening beyond the hospital doors. She only knew that Jonah was doing better, that Mr. Grayson had bought her a new pair of socks, and that today a nurse had silently placed her hand on Hannah's shoulder and walked away without saying a word. She opened her notebook and wrote, "People may not be the same, but maybe they can still choose to do the same thing, just once. Just once is enough." That night, in the on-call room behind the emergency ward, Dana Lowell, a young nurse once reprimanded for failing to follow protocol, sat facing the computer screen, the blue light reflecting off her tired cheeks. She had been thinking for hours. Should she send the clip? Should she speak the truth? The video, recorded by a phone hidden inside her lab coat pocket, clearly showed Dr. Evelyn Morris refusing to treat Jonah. The words, "No papers, no insurance, no admission," rang out like a blade. Inexcusable, uncoverable. Dana sent the clip to the office of attorney Rachel Bloom, attaching a note. "I wasn't braver than that child. I hope the law won't stay silent." At St. Jerome's Church, Father Thomas Keene opened his pastoral journal. A page, written in fading ink, recorded the day Hannah came to the church, bringing Jonah, the little boy burning with fever and unable to open his eyes. "I need a mum, but Mum's gone. Mummy, I'll be the mum." Father Thomas wrote down the exact date and time, the condition of the two children, and noted that he himself had called 3 different social service centers. None of them answered. At a small grocery store on Franklin Street, Ava Dunn spoke with Maggie Chen, the shop owner. Maggie handed Ava an old receipt with a special marking, "Loaf of bread, 0.00 USD-H. I don't know the girl's name, but every time she came, she always looked up at the bread shelf and then bowed her head really low. I've never seen a child so hungry, yet so polite." Ava took a photo of the receipt. It was proof that Hannah had received food from the community, while welfare services remained silent. At the hospital, William Grayson didn't just sit still. He reached out to a tech specialist at his former company, asking them to trace the original video posted by Vincent Hale, the first person to upload the clip. From there, the tech team uncovered several unpublished live streams, including one that showed Hannah knocking on the clinic door 3 times, ignored by the security guard. Another clip showed Vincent laughing and saying, "Looks like some midnight drama. Might get me a few views." William provided all these clips to Attorney Bloom. At the same time, Rachel Bloom assembled a team of volunteers to review reporting records from regional welfare agencies. One team member discovered that, at least 3 times in the past 4 months, Hannah's address had been flagged as unreachable, mother absent, children not seen, but no social worker ever came to check in person. Old records still listed the name Brenda Chastain, a former babysitter hired when Hannah's mother began working night shifts. Brenda had been noted for non-cooperative behavior, after several failed supervision attempts. But after a surprise inspection, she vanished from her registered address, leaving the 2 children alone in a cold rental room. No note, no one followed up. And so, in the dark, one child raised another, simply because the system saw nothing alarming. Angela Reed, Hannah's former teacher, added, "I once reported to the principal that Hannah often brought dry bread to school and dozed off in class. But they said I was overreacting. I don't think anyone cared." She handed her notebook to William. William watched the pieces come together, from the video, the bakery receipt, the church records, the falsified social service reports, and the classroom notes. "The truth doesn't need to be loud," he said to Ava. "It just needs to be placed in the right order." She nodded, and this time, there are enough people who won't look away. In her office, Rachel Bloom now had enough evidence to initiate a full legal case, alleging negligence, medical misconduct, and systemic failure by the state welfare system. The picture was no longer just the pain of one little girl. It was the consequence of a society's indifference. And William, the man who had once stayed silent, was the one who began fitting the first broken pieces together. That afternoon, after Ava's call ended, William remained seated beside the hospital bed where Jonah had fallen asleep. Across the room, Hannah quietly wrote something in a small notebook, her handwriting thin and trembling, yet steady like a breath. He watched the girl for a moment, then spoke gently, not with the tone of an adult giving orders, but like someone who once failed to protect the most important thing in his life. "Do you believe in justice, Hannah?" She paused, looked up. "I don't know. I've never seen it." William nodded slightly, his voice turning hoarse. "I once had a daughter, but I didn't stand up soon enough to protect her. This time, if you agree, I want to do what's right, with you, not for me, not for the press, but so that no other child has to walk through the snow like you did." Hannah didn't answer right away, but her eyes met his, not with doubt, not with fear, only a silent agreement, far more mature than her 10 years of age. On the day the trial opened, the air around Rachel Bloom City Hall felt like it was whispering something. Rachel Bloom said something softly to him, but William only gave a small nod, his eyes fixed on the courtroom door where Hannah would soon appear. The gavel struck, echoing against the wood-paneled walls like a heavy heartbeat. The trial began. Judge Michael Carver, a silver-haired man with a quiet face, known for his principle of "the law is the law," sat upright behind the bench. But that morning, his gaze lingered a little longer in one spot, where William Grayson sat beside 2 children, hands folded like a father holding onto something far greater than himself. The first witness was Linda Paxton, the receptionist at the clinic. She wore a beige blouse, hands clasped so tightly they turned pale. She walked slowly to the center of the room, almost pulling the silence of the entire back row with her. I saw the little girl knock, first gently, then harder, then with her forehead. Rachel Bloom stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Did you open the door, Miss Paxton?" Linda nodded, hesitantly. "I did. But when I asked for her name and insurance documents, she didn't have any. I didn't know what to do." Rachel gently interrupted. "So, you went back to ask Dr. Morris?" Linda swallowed hard. She just said, "No papers, no admittance. I stayed silent, and I've regretted it every night." Immediately after her testimony, a video from Nurse Dana Lowell's phone was played. All eyes turned to the screen, Evelyn Morris, in her white coat, clearly mouthing the words, her tone firm. "No papers, no admittance. I don't want to get sued." A quiet ripple moved through the courtroom. Linda bowed her head and wept. Dana Lowell was called next. She kept her gaze straight as she walked to the stand. "I knew Jonah didn't have time. I was about to break protocol, but Mr. Grayson spoke up first. The prosecutor interjected. "Miss Lowell, were you threatened or bribed in any way?" Dana looked straight ahead. "Number, I did what I believed was right, and if I get fired, I would do it again." Father Thomas was called next. He spoke slowly, each word deep and clear. "The two children spent the night at the church," Hannah whispered at the altar. "I'll be the mother." I don't think I've ever heard a more heartbreaking prayer. Angela Reed, their former teacher, stood up, holding a crumpled notebook. Hannah once hid a loaf of bread in her backpack. She even fell asleep during class one day. I sent warning emails, but Principal Walsh said it wasn't my concern. At this point, Rachel asked the court to allow one more special witness, Maggie Chen. She stepped forward, holding an old paper bag. "She once came into my shop, didn't ask for anything, just looked. I gave her a loaf of bread. She just bowed her head, then took her little brother and left. Not a single word of request. Not a single complaint." The turning point came when Brenda Chastain, a former nanny, was called. She appeared uneasy, her hands nervously entwined, avoiding everyone's eyes. "Yes, I used to care for Hannah, but her mother couldn't pay. I left after she disobeyed me once. I struck her." Rachel didn't say anything further. A long silence filled the room. Finally, Hannah was called to the stand. She stood beside William, her hands trembling slightly. Rachel reached out to steady her. Hannah's voice rose, not loud, but steady. "I'm not good at talking. But if I hadn't knocked, my brother would be in danger. I used to wrap my coat around Jonah to keep him warm. Some nights, I didn't sleep just to watch him breathe. And if he hadn't stopped that day, then there wouldn't have been anyone else." William didn't look at Hannah. He just gripped his cane tighter, lips pressed shut. On the face of a man who had once lost everything, a single tear slid down. Judge Carver leaned back. He removed his glasses, tapped them gently on the table, as if knocking on his own heart. "This court will review all the evidence and immediately issue a provisional ruling on guardianship and the responsibilities of the involved parties." The trial was not yet over, but the truth, with all its raw, unpolished edges, had already stepped into the center of that courtroom through the voice of a girl who had just turned 10. And sometimes that is all justice needs. The morning in court didn't begin with the sound of honking horns or murmuring voices. It began with a single nod from Judge Carver. The Waverly County Court ruled to grant temporary guardianship to Mr. William Grayson for the two minors, Hannah and Jonah Whitaker. Dr. Evelyn Morris was indefinitely suspended from practicing medicine due to severe violations of medical ethics and patient safety. Brenda Chastain, who had once been hired as a nanny for the two children, was sentenced to 9 months of non-custodial rehabilitation for child neglect and prolonged emotional harm. The County Child Welfare Office was ordered to conduct a full review of all backlog case files from the past 2 years, and the current director was temporarily suspended to facilitate the investigation. When those words were spoken, the atmosphere in the courtroom seemed to slow. Hannah turned to look at William in confusion. Jonah, though still on light-assisted breathing, managed a dreamy smile as he saw the teddy bear he had once dropped now resting in his arms. William didn't look at anyone. He simply nodded, like a man accepting not a responsibility, but a debt. Hannah looked at him, then timidly said as softly as a breath, "Grandpa, thank you." William turned to her, the corner of his mouth trembling. For the first time, she had called him Grandpa, no longer Sir or Mr. Out in the hallway, a few reporters were waiting, but Rachel Bloom had signaled, no statement. This wasn't a victory. It was the start of rebuilding trust. That evening, a public statement from the State Medical Board was released. Dr. Evelyn Morris was officially suspended from medical practice due to serious misconduct of medical ethics. A video clip and testimonies from medical staff and patients were attached as evidence. Meanwhile, Dana Lowell, the person who filmed the video and submitted the proof, received a public apology. At a small hospital commendation ceremony, when asked how she felt, she simply said, "I didn't do anything big. I just didn't want a child to suffer because of some policy." In a quiet corner of the town cemetery, Father Thomas stood beside a nameless white gravestone, the resting place of Hannah and Jonah's mother. Next to it sat a newly placed stone bench with a bronze plaque engraved, "For those who once passed by, so they have a place to sit and stay a while." 2 days later, after closely following developments and speaking with witnesses, Lisa Morrow, who had once harshly criticized William on national television, appeared in a special broadcast with a calmer demeanor. She looked directly into the camera. "I was wrong. I forgot that the law doesn't exist to impose, but to protect. And sometimes it's compassion that rewrites the law." William Grayson didn't just save 2 children. He reminded us of the one thing the system has long overlooked: humanity. She bowed her head, a rare gesture on live television. Social media erupted, but this time not in outrage, in stories of gratitude and change. Night fell. William watched the 2 children sleeping in the temporary room that was now theirs. He was no longer a businessman, no longer a man who had lost. He was simply a person who had learned that sometimes, to do the right thing, you have to be willing to let go of judgment and believe in the softest part of every human being: compassion. Behind him was the past. Ahead, a small nightlight. Beside it, Jonah still held his teddy bear. Hannah had just placed her notebook into a drawer. And that night, for the first time in many years, William slept peacefully, no longer haunted by echoes of the past, only soothed by the steady breathing of 2 children and a future that, though fragile, had truly begun. 1 year later, spring had come to Waverley. Sunlight shimmered through budding trees, and the air carried the damp scent of fresh earth after the season's first rain. In a quiet corner of the suburban outskirts, the White House on the hill was now home to William Grayson, who had moved in with Hannah and Jonah. On a Monday morning, Jonah wore a blue jacket and clutched his familiar one-eared teddy bear. He had been accepted into the local preschool, and on his first day, William personally held his hand all the way to the school gate. On the front steps, William knelt down to eye level, his silver hair catching the soft sunlight. "Will I come back?" Jonah asked, looking up with a slightly slurred voice. William smiled gently. "I think you'll come back today," with a smile, "and no need for a piggyback ride." Across the slope, Hannah stepped out of the house, her sketch bag slung over one shoulder. She had been accepted into the town's evening art class, a small, quiet group, but it was the first place where she felt like she had a voice, even if it wasn't spoken aloud. Her teacher, Mr. Whitman, once said, "This girl draws from memory, and from a kind of light not everyone has seen." One afternoon, Hannah brought a painting into the living room. "For you," she said. William removed his glasses and looked closely. The painting showed a blonde girl, Emily. She stood between Jonah and Hannah, holding their hands. Behind them was the hill and the stone bench. William couldn't find words. He simply pulled Hannah into a hug. She stood still, then gently leaned her head on his shoulder. No need for many words, because both understood. A part of Emily still lived on, through the courage of a child who once stood outside a clinic door. At the same time, Ava Dunn, now the official writer for the Waverley Voice's Human Interest column, published a feature story. There are heroes who don't wear capes, just small feet still willing to move forward, and there are old souls who once believed they had let go, only to suddenly learn how to hold a hand again. The article spread widely, not because it was sensational, but because it touched on something we all know deep down. Kindness isn't lost, it's just finding its way back. On the day the first free medical center of the Emily's Light Foundation was inaugurated, William didn't speak. Rachel Bloom stood in for him before the crowd, but by the end of the ceremony, Hannah, in a simple green dress, stood up. I don't know how to say things like adults do, but I know sometimes people ask why someone would save a child with no papers. I think you don't need papers. You just need someone to remember they're a person. No one clapped. They stood, silently, because some speeches don't need to be applauded. They only need to be heard. That afternoon, William stood alone beside the old stone bench. Next to him, the brass plaque had darkened with time. For those who once passed by, so there's a place to sit again. He didn't sit. He simply placed a bundle of wildflowers down and walked away, toward the small house where 2 children were waiting for him. That family wasn't big, but it was real. And there, the past no longer hurt the present. It was simply a part of how hearts had learned to become warmer. Perhaps what makes a kind society isn't grand gestures, but the moment someone chooses to stop, bend down, and listen to a child. Hannah and Jonah's story isn't just about a cold night. It's about a choice, to stand still or step forward, to judge or to understand. Have you ever been too tired to reach out? Don't be afraid to share, because even in the smallest, quietest moments, you might be the light someone else is looking for. If you've read this far, don't forget to drink some water and apply a bit of lotion. Your skin deserves love, just like your heart does.